Okay. So it's called 501c3 Refresher, and today we're going to talk about balancing compliance and engagement. And the photo is one of me and our NCJW friends and neighbors at a counter protest for in support of abortion. So today's agenda, we'll review what 501c3 is, what the rules of engagement are. The purpose today is we're going to spend a lot of time making sure that we all understand how to stay compliant and active on our issues, but still maintaining our own individual rights of free speech. And then finally, we'll talk about what to do if we're not so sure. So what is 501c status and why is it important? So 501c status is a tax-exempt status as determined by the IRS. These are nonprofit organizations exempt from some federal taxes. And probably one of the most defining points of 501c3 organizations are that the donors' contributions are tax deductible. So 501c3 organizations are typically entities that are organized and operated exclusively for religious or charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. So, okay.
Could people remember to mute themselves if they're not speaking, please? There's some background noise.
That's the activities in which the organization can legally participate. There is absolutely no participation in any political campaigns allowed by 501c3 organizations. That is the biggest takeaway. Note that means there can be no contributions to political campaign funds, nor any public statement in favor of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. These activities are absolutely prohibited, directly or indirectly, and violating this prohibition results in denial or revocation of tax-exempt status and potentially the imposition of fines. Additionally, this is so serious that there is no exception for a de minimis amount of activity. If you have any Latin scholars or legal or lawyers out there, you know, sometimes you're allowed just to bend the rules a little bit, but in this case, there is absolutely no violation allowed. And in our case, with our numerous sections, if any section actually contravenes any of these rules, then it impacts our entire organization. Additionally, we can't just be following the rules, we must also appear to be in complete compliance. So I think today you'll see that when in doubt, we're going to suggest that we take a fairly cautious approach. Now, this provision in the tax code was put in place in 1954 by then Senator Lyndon B. Johnson, and that's why this provision is known as the Johnson Amendment. And you may have heard of it recently because Donald Trump was trying to revoke this amendment. So far has not been successful. So there are other nonprofits out there with whom we interact, with whom we might even be involved, with whom we might make donations, but they're not necessarily nonpartisan. And why is that? Well, we're a 501c3 organization and must remain partisan and have limited provisions for political lobbying. There are also nonprofit organizations that are designated 501c4 organizations. They are also nonprofit, but they are able to more freely conduct political or lobbying efforts, and donations made to those organizations are not tax deductible. So ACLU, for example, is primarily a C4 organization. For the people on the phone, I have some logos from some of the organizations that might be familiar to us and with whom we might interface. National Organization of Women is a C4 organization. They have a lot more opportunity to do lobbying, partisan lobbying. Planned Parenthood is one near and dear to our hearts, with whom we have a great relationship with, and they are a C3 like ourselves. Southern Poverty Law, I don't have the logo up here, but many of you are familiar with, is also a C3 organization. Why this is important? Because we do a lot of work in coalitions. And so it's important that we understand under which rules we're all playing by. What might get confusing is that some of the larger nonprofits might have two different arms. They might have the C4 organization that they can do more lobbying, and they might have a C3 organization that is primarily about education. A good example of this is Planned Parenthood. Most of the work they do is C3, but they do have a smaller C4 arm for lobbying. The NRA is unfortunately an example. They're primarily a C4, but they do have a C3 arm primarily for education. ACLU is primarily C4, but they also have a C3 foundation. So if you're ever in doubt, actually, one of the things that I do is just look up the organization and press on the donate button. And if it says it's tax deductible, it's C3. But why this is important is, as I mentioned, is because we do a lot of work in coalitions. And certainly more recently, there have even been what I call movements, such as the Women's March or Me Too movement, that in fact don't have any designation whatsoever. So be very clear when you're working with others in a coalition to make sure that you understand their status. Many of the current political movements may have no status at all, and you might even, and won't be bound by these restrictions, or may not even know to what you're referring to. So you might have to do some educating. Doesn't mean we can't work with them, but you'd want to get reassurance that at least the event or the particular program in which you're working will participate and follow the 501c3 rules. So now we're going to move on to a more specific discussion of sort of what we can and can't do. But before I do that, are there any questions so far about the tax code or not-for-profits or anything? I'll pause here. No? Oh, I see Lily.
I did just want to say, this is Barb Silman down in Florida. I did just want to say that in terms of finding out if somebody's a 501c3 or 501c4, you can go to the IRS website and there is a listing. You can put in the name of the organization and they will show you whether they are currently a 501c3. It's probably the most comprehensive way of doing that.
That is. Thank you so much for that. That's a much better way than I suggested, so thank you. And that would be the actual source, wouldn't it? So that's great. All right. Okay, so what does that actually mean? So for those of you on the phone, I'm about to provide a list of the things that we can talk about and the things that we can do and the things that we can't do, but I'll read them all off. So this is really the crux of balancing engagement and compliance. As a general rule, if we focus on education and training and we talk about issues versus candidates, so if we focus and talk about things and issues rather than talking about people, and if we continue our lobbying on legislation and issues, that should be our guidance. So when we talk about issues, what does that mean? We can definitely continue to advocate for the organization's issues, even during an election year. And we can definitely engage in limited lobbying, including ballot measures and federal judicial nominations. And this is where some people have the question, well, wait a minute, we've talked about Gorsuch, we've talked about judicial nominees. Why is it that we can talk about these people, but we can't talk about political candidates? That's because these are nominations. And so in fact, we're commenting on policy and choices that our elected officials are making. So that is why this is allowed. We can continue to criticize and also celebrate sitting elected officials on positions and activities. There are a couple of caveats there. If the elected official is now running for something, we have to be careful that we don't escalate our criticism. And we have to be careful that we continue to talk about the issues and positions that we've had a historical position on. So we can continue to talk about women's rights, we can continue to talk about immigration, but if all of a sudden we start slamming the official who is up for re-election on, say, their stance on an environmental issue, that I would say NCJW has had strong and historical records, so that would look more suspect. We can conduct nonpartisan public education and training sessions about participation in the political process. It doesn't mean we have to stand on the sidelines throughout the entire political process. We can, in fact, prepare candidate questionnaires and create voter guides and hold candidate forums. But this one has a big caveat as well. We have to make sure that we are completely inclusive. We must have invited all the candidates. We must ask them about all the issues and not just the ones that we have that are near and dear to our heart. We can't identify those that are pro-choice, for example, but we can, in fact, as long as they're fair and complete, prepare these questionnaires. And we can conduct nonpartisan get out the vote and voter registration drives, focusing on all the issues, not just one. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion about get out the vote, and I think this could be a whole seminar in and of itself. This one, I'd say the last two, candidate forums and get out the vote, are particularly challenging, and I would urge you to look to National for some guidance. As a matter of fact, if you are holding a candidate forum, you must, in fact, work with National Office. Right, Lindsay, nod your head, prior to that engagement. And I think the office is also interested this year in tracking any of the get out the vote activities. So what does that mean you can't do? So generally speaking, we can't talk about individual people. So we can't endorse candidates for public office. We can't make any contributions, whether monetary or in kind, any campaign contributions. We can't ask candidates to sign pledges on issues. So if this candidate, if they were to be elected, would they promise to support the DREAM Act, for example, if elected? As I mentioned before, we can't increase the volume or amount of criticism of sitting officials who are also candidates as election time approaches. And we can't publish or communicate anything that explicitly or implicitly favors or opposes a candidate. That again is those lists of these ones are pro-choice, or these ones are would support, or these ones are supportive of gun control, for example. And we can't highlight the differences between candidates for public office on a high-profile issue on which the candidates have diverging views. So these are just some of the guidance for do's and don'ts. I'll give you a minute just to, for those to see the screen, to read them through, and those on the phone just sort of soak.
Jill, can I just jump in with one small thing? It's Lindsay.
Sure.
And I know you said this, it's just important to reiterate. So all of these really critical items that Jill said we can do and we can't do, the we being we in our NCJW capacity.
Correct.
So just to repeat that, so as NCJW, we can't do these. You as an individual can do whatever you want as long as you separate those hats.
Great, Lindsay. Lead into the next slide.
Oops, sorry.
So as Lindsay sort of suggests, sort of pointed out, in which some of you, when you see that whole list, oh my God, we can't do this and we can't do this. Wait a minute, as an NCJW leader, does that mean I give up my basic First Amendment rights of speech? Absolutely not. So on this slide, there's actually a picture of me participating in the most recent Women's March. So definitely individuals, we as individuals do not give up our basic first rights of speech and association just because we joined the board or we're a member of a 501c3. But what Lindsay mentioned is absolutely critical. We must be crystal clear when we are representing ourselves and when we are representing NCJW. This is very, very important. Not only can we not only can we not be, again, we must also be in compliance and we must appear to be in compliance. So that even includes board members and paid staff who use the 501c3 assets or facilities to carry out their personal campaign work. For example, if you're supporting a candidate, you cannot be using your NCJW distribution list to send out invitations to a campaign fundraiser. You can't use the photocopy, or you can't use email accounts, you can't use the social media platforms. And this, in fact, should be made clear to all board members, and particularly to paid staff, and it should actually be in your policies. You might want to check that the next time. I think it gets very muddy when you're having a meeting and just before the meeting you're all chatting and you can't help chatting about the news of the day. I think you should make a very clear distinction about when the meeting starts and make sure that the meeting itself is completely compliant, and make sure that you have a very clear end to the meeting when you can maybe resume some personal conversations. That I think can hold in, in a private home, but I think you're even at risk if you have, let's say, an NCJW meeting in a public place and people can see you, that you're obviously an NCJW section, you might have some signs and so on, and then still might hear either before or after the event some political conversations. This is so important that, as a matter of fact, we're going to do a couple little case studies. How's that? So here, for those of you on the phone, I actually have some little campaign buttons and my NCJW director badge and a few other little NCJW badges. And these are all kinds of things that we probably have and are on various hats and bags and so on. Here's one scenario. I'm attending a fundraiser for an exciting female progressive candidate in my conservative district. There are sure to be some interesting like-minded women there. Why don't I wear my new NCJW board member name tag? What a great networking opportunity. Here's another scenario. We'll discuss them together. Supporting candidates. I'm super excited about a candidate who is smart, progressive, and gay. I personally donated to his campaign. I wear his button proudly to our board meeting because I want all my friends to know about him. So, which of these badges that I'm showing here would you actually wear to an NCJW board meeting? We have a small enough group. You can weigh in or you can use the chat box. So I've got a NCJW button that says Women Speak Up. I've got my director button, I Love Thy Neighbor. I've got BIS for Illinois, JB Pritzker for governor, Pilar for governor, and a button that says Love Trump's Hate. Which of those could you wear to an NCJW board meeting?
That candidates.
Pardon me? Can you repeat, please? There was a lot of background noise. Anybody else?
Sure, I'll get on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Any that do not have, which I think is what the speaker was saying, that do not announce a candidate.
Right.
And I believe that includes, we can wear Love Trump's Hate because the T is not capitalized and there's an S on the end.
Right. What do people think about that Love Trump's Hate one?
It's okay.
I think that's, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even know. Okay, yes, I was the one who said anything that has to do with candidates you can't wear in conjunction with something that has to do with NCJW. So when I went out on a voter registration drive at the last March, I did not go with my NCJW hat, even though because it was with the Democratic Party.
Okay.
The Love Trump's Hate, I probably wouldn't mix the two, just because I think that's a gray area, but maybe you can.
I think that's a perfect gray area, actually. Love Trump's hate on the face of it looks pretty benign, and yet we know that it was part of the Democratic campaign slogan, and that's in fact where I got the button from. So, you know, in order to be cautious, I probably wouldn't wear it. What do other people think?
I wouldn't wear it.
Okay. So which of these would you wear? You know, I think it's obvious now. Which of these would you wear at a political campaign?
I don't have them in front of me, but all the ones that are position oriented.
Okay, all right. And you would not be wearing anything that identify, you would not be wearing the NCJW name tag, for example, to the political campaigns. Okay? Everyone pretty clear on that?
Yes.
Good. I think it's important. The other thing I think it's important is to make sure that you feel clear and comfortable enough to speak up and educate your other NCJW members, because it's very easy to get excited and it's very easy to make these slips. But you know, now that you are clear, think about how you would gently be able to talk to other people in your section when you see these behaviors or comments. Okay, so those were a couple of case studies about us individually. We're now going to move to three case studies, as a matter of fact, that when we're actually working as NCJW members and as an NCJW section. I'll let Ari take it from here. We were going to split up into some chat rooms. I don't know how that works with the numbers that we have and with some people not being able to see the screen. Ari, I'll let you guide that.
Yeah, so so first I'm going to send a copy of the directions and case studies in the chat box so everyone's able to get it. The folks on the phone, I'm going to ask that if you, so I'll mix up the rooms, and if you are on the phone, maybe have someone in your group reread the scenario to you. But generally, great. Did everyone get this? I sent it to everyone. Or folks on the computer, did you all get the directions? So let me know if you haven't, message me like directly and I'll get them to you, but I'm gonna break everyone off into breakout rooms. You're gonna wanna choose a spokesperson for your group and then discuss the scenarios. I'll name the rooms according to the scenario that you work on. So if you are room number 3, then you'll work on voter registration. If you're number 4, you'll work on planning an event, and if you're number 5, you'll work on holding a candidate forum.
Okay, and just to be clear, when you're in those chats, the idea is to review the scenario together, discuss which portions of the scenario you might be comfortable with, you believe are compliant, which portions may not be, and what you could do to ensure that the entire event or activity is 501c3 compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then we'll come back and discuss.
Great.
Okay.
So you've been invited to join a room. Go ahead and hit accept. If you're in the phone, I think it automatically will do it.
I mean,
We have a friend in common. She's and it's my old Houston book club who are having a reunion in Denver, and my friend is becoming she's not Jewish, but she's become very politically involved, and she's run into Joe. So
Wonderful.
She is the political woman extraordinaire in Denver right now. I mean, she's amazing. Not that I know her, but yes.
Wonderful.
NCJW member?
no, she's not. She's within
Denver
the business.
section is really taking off.
Yeah.
Well, everyone is back from our rooms, from the breakout rooms at this point.
Okay. So should we, so who wants to speak from our voter registration? Carol, you captured, or Barbara, you captured our conversation pretty well. Oh, I think she had a phone call. Maybe Carol.
Carol, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Maybe, can everyone see what it is, Ari, or should Carol read it out?
Why don't you read it out for the folks on the phone as well?
Okay.
It is in the chat box.
Okay. So here was the scenario that we discussed. It was about voter registration. We have an opportunity to set up a voter registration booth at the JCC. We're given a table with our organization name on it. We have information about the date of the upcoming election, and we have trained folks available to register voters. We're educating our Jewish community by identifying which candidates are pro-Israel. Isn't that expected of a Jewish organization?
We determined that it is not, and that we need to just educate the people who stop by as to where and when and how to vote, and to not give the positions of the candidates in respect to Israel. It is not appropriate.
Great.
But can I just add one thing?
Sure.
I think this is Barbara. I think we all agreed that it was okay to indicate to voters that they should educate themselves about issues that are important.
Okay.
That's part of being a good voter, is to educate yourself and vote for people who support your own issues.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you could say something like elections affect on the issues we care about. Very general.
Okay, great. What do others think about that? Any questions, or anyone have this opportunity or this challenge?
I have a question about that. Number one, the question is regarding the candidate's stance on Israel, whether the candidate is pro-Israel, and number one, we can't really divulge in that situation the candidates pros and cons in any, well, I guess we can, but I guess that brings us to the second thing, and that is that NCJW doesn't have a specific communal stance on Israel. We are ourselves divided on that. So that makes things even more dicey in a Jewish community setting. I'm particularly interested in how this question plays out because it opens up the crevices that divide us. And in many cases, separate us from a lot of our Jewish sisters and brothers.
This is Beatrice, if I could just hop in. We do have positions in our principles and resolutions. Sorry. So we do. So if we were to take a position in public, which is a little bit different, do we just have to make sure that it complies with those? But it's a little bit tangential. But the other issue that I see in raising one of these issues is this is again tangential, but it is, whenever I go into a Congress person's office, they send the Israel person, even though we said we're here to talk about women's health care. So I would be reluctant to make that the one issue we flag over all the others. I don't know if it's appropriate to say here are NCJW's platforms and priorities, and this is where we stand on these issues. Go vote according to your what your heart and conscience tell you. I think it's possible perhaps to do that, but it's not, I wouldn't take a position on candidates themselves.
Right. That is something we discussed. Lindsay, you came up with a good answer on that.
Yeah, I would probably encourage you to put as little information about NCJW's positions on specific issues around voter registration efforts. I think it's great to put stuff about how to become a member and our general work, particularly if you have like non-advocacy work in the community that you can put out there in ways that people can get involved. But I would probably encourage people to like check out our website or contact you separately to learn more about our positions on specific issues, because then it gets a little dicey when we start talking about our positions. And let's say, something you can have on the table would be a candidate questionnaire that a nonpartisan group put together. So sometimes League of Women Voters puts together, information, like there are numerous questions on issues with all the candidates' answers. And that would be good information to provide at a voter registration table. However, you don't want to then like juxtapose that with like our position on issues, because it kind of is like register and then support the candidates that support our issues, and we don't want to confuse that. So try to avoid having too much NCJW issue position at your table.
Lindsay?
Mm-hmm.
I just mentioned that I just did voter registration. It was my first time and it was fabulous. But for the Democratic Party, and even through the Democratic Party, they remain very neutral. They do not bring up, it's very much like you're saying. It's very straightforward. You're really just signing people up. But it's interesting to know how we can maybe also incorporate, if you're looking into, because we are looking to do our own membership drives through NCJW, to just incorporate, if you want to become a member. But I appreciated the fact that even through the Democratic Party, it was very straightforward and very neutral.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think this is a good example where it is wise to err on the side of caution. So, let's move on to the next case study. And I want to acknowledge that we had that whole question about Israel. I think that's probably a whole other conversation. So I'll leave that for Lindsay and Ari to schedule that at another time. The next case study we had was planning an event.
Josh.
We've invited the Attorney General to speak at our major donor luncheon. 1 month after she confirmed, she announces she's running for governor. Oy vey, do we have to cancel? What group did that, and do you have and what did you decide?
So my group of Bea and Elaine, who we were unable to communicate with, talked about this one, and we surmised that it is an experience that many sections have actually had. This happens often, and it is dicey, and it is a real oy vey situation, especially given that we've got this group of volunteers who've put together this luncheon, and they've spent so much time, and the Attorney General is a big draw, and the invitations are printed, and so all of a sudden you're in this 501c3 morass. And at first, I said, no, you can't do it. It just wouldn't look good. And Beatrice said, I don't know, this is really tough. And we both came around to agreeing that it's going to go forward, but with very, very specific instructions to the Attorney General that she focus on some cases and some experiences that she has had as Attorney General, and that she is not allowed to campaign in any way. And it would be great if the contact person from NCJW working with her specifies even further those cases, those experiences that will resonate with our members and that won't get into a situation where she is selling herself and her character strengths as a hidden way of running. The question that I asked as we were coming together again states was do we also have to invite her opponent or her opponents in that dicey scenario, and who is going to police the situation, and who is going to make sure that it doesn't become a sticky wicket for anyone.
Well, I like where you came out with that, that you can go ahead as long as you had some very strict guidelines in place and that you made it clear to the Attorney General why she was invited. And you might also add a disclaimer at the beginning of the speech that she was invited prior to the campaign, and her remarks are going to be about her being a sitting legislator, etc. So I like where you came out. Now the question about do you invite her opponent actually morphs into our next case study, which is about candidate forums. So before we
Jill,
go, yeah, go ahead.
Great. I was just saying, can we add on a little bit more about that one before we move on? But I wanted to leave a chance for other people to jump in.
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to.
Yeah. Anybody else? What did everybody think about where this group came out? Lindsay, I think you were the one that suggested this case study, probably because it has happened in many sections.
It has.
Yeah.
I thought they were very thoughtful in their answer, and I wouldn't have even, I hadn't thought about it, but I like the idea that they considered inviting the opposing candidate. I think they really vetted it well.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you invite the opposing candidate, then in fact you're having a candidate forum, which is quite a different experience.
Yeah.
So
here's what I would just jump in and add. I think you guys are very thoughtful in your response, and I think sometimes it just depends. And normally I'm going to say yes, you can absolutely carry on with your event, assuming like there's a kind of the following situations. And anytime this comes up, I invite you all to contact our office. But I think on any printout material going forward or mailing, you put a disclaimer like Jill mentioned. This is a and don't say bipartisan. This is a nonpartisan 501c3 event. NCJW does not endorse or oppose any candidates. My guess is the event is probably about a topic. And so you would want to keep it that topic and not like it's a big decision to like change it to a candidate forum, and like that would be a different invitation to the AG. It's a very different event, and before you would do that, we would want to see how we could keep this event and make it work. Whoever introduces the AG or the speakers would again repeat, this is a nonpartisan event. When you interact with the Attorney General's staff, make sure you're interacting with her staff, like her Attorney General staff, and not her candidate staff. And if you want to go a step further, you can contact the candidate's staff and say, this is a nonpartisan event. So you can kind of cover all of your bases by reminding participants that this is nonpartisan, and be prepared to interrupt her as she speaks if it gets partisan, and jump in there and say, I'm sorry, this is not the event to talk about that. It's particularly when there's Q&A, that'd be another. So just have people ready and a plan in place if it shifts. Those are some other thoughts.
Thank you. I do want to move to candidate forum because I'm mindful of the time, actually. So finally, holding a candidate forum, which seems to be on many of our minds. So our members look to us for education on the upcoming election, so we've planned a candidate forum. We've sent out a questionnaire to all the candidates asking for their views on our issues. We've invited all the candidates, but only the Democrats can come. Oh, well, isn't it better anyways? What did this group come up with? What do we think of this candidate forum?
That might have been the group that was all on the phone, and none of us had the questions. So we talked and came up with other questions we had for you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, what do people think about candidate forums where not everybody is able to show up? Can you go ahead anyways?
I think that candidates should at least send their chief of staff or deputy or some volunteer to represent them, to enable you to have a real forum. Otherwise, it looks too one-sided.
Well, what happens if you have a position where there's like 10 people running? Like, you may not get everybody. So do you just have to make sure you have different people that are on different sides?
Yes, here's where we should, we have the appearances is everything as well. So yes, you must make every effort to include as many people as possible. And especially they're also busy. So it's a logistical nightmare and a scheduling nightmare to get everybody. That's, just the reality of campaigning. But if you go to every length to make sure you accommodate, to Eleanor's point, you allow another representative to come. If you allow them the opportunity to fill out perhaps a questionnaire in advance and make that available. If you have a disclaimer at the beginning and make sure that people realize that everyone was invited and only these people were able to attend. There are ways to go forward with the candidate forum. This one also is, you really must be cautious. I would encourage you to get some advice from Lindsay before embarking on it. And as a matter of fact, it's a requirement to check with head office before you partake, before you get involved in a candidate forum. So I want to make sure we have some time for those questions that came up. Yes, go ahead. Anybody?
So we weren't clear about the, celebrating or criticizing a sitting official, elected official, based on maybe obviously a specific issue. That's a delicate issue, which you mentioned, but maybe if you could reiterate that point, because then I had a further question, because I've actually been involved in this in my section, where let's say the Colorado legislature, the Senate, Republican-controlled Senate, just advocated, they didn't do away with bump stocks.
Right.
And do I just have to say in our when we send that out to our greater membership in terms of giving out the information, is it okay for me to say the Republican-controlled Senate, or do I just have to say the Senate?
I think it's certainly okay to say how disappointed we were that the Denver House wasn't able to pass this law, and how important it is that we keep the pressure on our elected officials.
I think the point I'm making though is,
Republican controlled.
Republican controlled.
I hear your question, Jill. This is Lindsay, and I think we go back and forth in our office because the facts are also the facts, but we try not to overdo it. if that makes sense. So it's a little easier to say like Republican leadership, like if we can get as narrow as possible, because it might not be all of the Republicans, right? So it could be like the Republican leadership didn't allow a vote. And rather than saying like, you know, all of the Republicans in the Senate or in the House, because maybe maybe that's not true.
I think the way we specified it was that the majority of the Republican, you know, we didn't even say that it was everybody in the Republicans, but we didn't even know if it was okay to pinpoint that it is a Republican majority. But you're saying in some respects, you can say the facts are the facts. You just have to be very careful in how you word it.
And how you word it and how you phrase it. You know, you'll notice, I hope most of you or all of you are getting our Capitol Hill updates. So every Friday we send out a weekly wrap up and we have legislative updates and Capitol Hill updates. And you'll notice our language. When we mention a lawmaker, we almost always put like their state and their party, because that's information. So if you are consistent with always saying like, which district and which party all lawmakers are from, then that's just part of how you talk about what's happening in your state. And sometimes we do say like Senate Republican or the Republican leaders in the Senate, because sometimes they are the ones blocking and other ones are not. So, and sometimes we don't, and we just say the Senate didn't pass this or the House.
Could I follow up on this?
Sure.
Did you mean that if you like what a particular legislator did in the, you know, are you allowed to say that? Are you allowed to say we thank such and such, or we applaud so and so for supporting gun control or abortion rights or whatever? That's what I took away from what you said it was okay to do in terms of applauding or criticizing a particular politician. So we were wondering if you could just clarify when you can do that and when you can't do that.
I think you can absolutely celebrate when and thank legislators for when they support something that's an issue of ours. I think a lot of it is the timing too. Don't forget, we have to shy away from things when there's a campaign involved. But if the legislator is a sitting legislator, I think you can be more critical. I think what the difference is, Jill, if you say, the Republican majority House, or the Republicans are in the majority in the House, and that's why they didn't pass the gun law. So therefore, we need to get out the vote and put more Democrats in next time. I mean, that's where a line that's a line you couldn't cross.
Yeah, and as far as criticizing or applauding sitting lawmakers, if it's something you always do, you can keep doing it. If you're like, ooh, this lawmaker's running for office, so let's elevate this person and how they're voting, whether it's good or bad, that's problematic. But if it's already what you're doing and you keep up that regular drumbeat, it's fine. I would just remind you, though, that they're going to have different websites, different social media, different like contact information for their like offices and for their campaign. So be really mindful when you direct people and how to contact lawmakers, that you're directing them to their office and not to their campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Like in this is something we notice in Twitter. They'll have a different handle, which is their like Twitter name, for their like official capacity and for their campaign. So you want to be really mindful if you tweet. Mm-hmm. Same thing for Facebook, I believe.
And then just to clarify something else, you said it's not okay to prepare a list of sitting legislators who support or don't support a particular position?
That's correct, if you're only talking about a single position. If you want to make a very comprehensive list of all the legislators and a number of positions, you can do that. But just focusing on one position is more problematic.
Okay, thank you.
We also
go ahead.
Go ahead. We also brought up in our group about, which I don't think we've delved into a whole lot, in terms of what we can do from a personal standpoint and how we can, convey our message from a personal standpoint. Let's say using our Facebook page, which I do. Let's say on this particular issue with the bump stocks. But then a few posts later, I might share a post about our voter registration training that we're doing from NCJW. So that's on my Facebook page. Is that a problem when you're kind of mixing? I'm not, when I post my own thing, I don't mix it with NCJW. But a few posts later, it may be join us for voter registration training. Is that an issue? Is that a problem?
Do you want me to answer that, Jill, or you want to?
Go ahead.
It's a great question. And we all, we've tackled that and are trying to tackle that. So if you create a Facebook or a Twitter account for your role at NCJW, then you cannot use it to talk about partisan issues or to endorse or oppose candidates. If your Facebook account is your individual Facebook account, you can both lift up NCJW events and you can take position on nominees. Some people in their description say I'll post I'm speaking in my individual capacity or something to make it clear. I've seen that in people's kind of blurbs or bios. Some SPAs have a Facebook event or a Facebook account. They cannot take a position using that account. If you're a president of an NCJW section, sometimes it's a little dicier. It's generally fine, but I think you just have to be clear that this is your individual Facebook account. If someone created an account just for NCJW, then you want to avoid taking positions on candidates. So again, if your section has a Twitter account, it's pretty clear what you can and can't do, I hope. But if you have an individual Twitter account, you can do whatever you want. But then you wouldn't want to be using that for NCJW stuff, only stuff. You can for sure promote NCJW events and efforts on your social media platform. Did that help clear it up or just confuse it more?
Well, one thing I'll add to that really quickly too, in regards to Facebook, especially going back to if you are a leader, you can make it really clear what is your private Facebook and what is not by how public your posts are. So you can go into your privacy settings and set it to your friends only and have in your description, this is my personal Facebook, and then you can post whatever you want. But if it's open and public and people are able to follow you and your posts are all public for everyone to view and you have NCJW president or advocacy chair or whatever, then it's a little bit trickier. So if you are posting political things, I would just encourage you to not put your NCJW position on your Facebook, and then also make sure that your posts are set to your friends only, so it's clear that it's a private account and that it's your private account.
Good.
Okay, thank you. I know there may be more questions, but I am mindful of time. So if you're ever unsure about anything, please contact Lindsay or Ari at the office. In particular, if you're doing any election-related activities, that's candidate forum or get out the vote, make sure you contact Lindsay. And finally, if you want a little more information on this, in addition to what the office can provide, a really good organization is called Alliance for Justice that has information on these issues. And I might add also provide us advice when we're unclear. We're actually a member, and I've actually been in the office when we've called Alliance for Justice. They have sort of a hotline of lawyers that can provide you clarity on sticky issues. So that's so you would do that alongside Lindsay, but that's certainly a resource that we use at NCJW. So with that, we probably need to close. But thank you very much for joining us. I think Ari will let you know that the slides will be available. And if you as leaders want to use these slides with your sections, let me know. I can also provide you any notes that I used. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.